Excellent. Welcome, everyone. I'm Adam Spence, CEO of SVX. Absolutely delighted that you are joining us for the quarterly Impact Index webinar. I'm joining you today from Toronto or Takaranto, which is Treaty 13 territory. That's the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, and many other nations, unrecorded and recorded. I'm very grateful to be able to meet and work on this land, including the opportunity to share time with you today. It's also important to know and understand history as an act of advancing reconciliation. So I wanted to share a couple of things. One is the Whose Land map, which gives you a picture across Canada of treaties and territories of Indigenous persons, nations, and communities, as well as also share a bit of an older story. It's very old, actually, on the past and present pathways of Indigenous persons in Toronto. For those of you that are unfamiliar, Toronto Davenport, it's a bit of a winding street that is on the shores of Old Lake Iroquois and is a historic portage and walking pathway of Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. So I wanted to share that as part of that learning process and learning journey. As we roll through this particular program, our quarterly webinar, wanted to talk about a few notes on format. So this is a bit of a podcast, meets Daily Show, meets The View, meets CBC's Front Burner for Impact Investing in Canada. We're still experimenting with the format. It's the third time we're doing it, but feedback is very welcome. On format, there's no slides or videos, but we have links and resources shared in the chat, trying to maximize the amount of interaction and conversation. In terms of what we'll cover on content, we'll start with three issuers having interviews. They're joining us today. Delighted to have them share time with us. Then there'll be some updates and insights. We'll have a panel and a conversation with Lars from Realize. And then we'll open up the conversation to group discussion, including the audience, as well as those folks that are speaking with us today. All done in about 60 minutes or less. On the housekeeping side of things, again, before we begin, want to run through a few items. One is if you have questions or comments, please put those in the chat. We'll make sure that we try to cover those at the end or even throughout on the dialogues we have with folks. If at any time you need technical support, you can also place that in the chat. We'll help you along the way. We just ask you to stay on mute during this particular session. And so we may ask you to bring forward your own question verbally, but we'll point that out and then have you come on mute to share with us. We have an outstanding team of folks supporting us. Our executive producer, Gabby, who always does a wonderful job of keeping us on track, on time, and with a wonderful program. Jessica, who helped us program this and played a leadership role there. And then I'll joined by my co-hosts, Mizan and Haley. They're going to walk us through the interview segment. Really delighted to be able to do that. And so let's get into the program and into the show. And so we'll start off with Mizan, and we'll ask for folks to give him a big round of emoticon applause as he kicks off the interviews. So big welcome to Mizan.
Thanks so much, Adam. What a warm introduction. My name is Mizan. I'll be starting off with the interviews segment today. So we have three incredible fund managers joining us, and we'll be hearing from each of them about the work that they're doing at the front lines of equity-focused investing. So we'll start with our first guest. I'll welcome Dara Adekunle, founder and managing partner of Farmties Capital. Farmties invests in African agribusinesses and is working to connect those businesses to global markets. So welcome, Dara. Really great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thanks. So I'll start things off by just asking if you could tell us about your story and your fund.
Opportunity. For us, our story is rooted on practical experience. I used to be a farmer and commodity trader. I've worked with a lot of smallholder farmers, specifically in Nigeria, in aggregating and getting their products into either food processing companies or also to export markets. And based on my experience and based on other experience that I've gained over the years, which happen to be working on donor-funded programs like the USAID Feed the Future program in Nigeria, as well as, my experience with Global Affairs Canada, what I did find that there seems to be like a mismatch in what is available and what is actually needed, especially for SMEs that we usually term the missing middle, who are often, I'll say often find challenges in accessing capital to fulfill export orders. And this is largely because they are asset light and cash flow heavy, and so the collateral requirements will always come up. And only a few banking institutions understand maybe, on using commodity as a collateral, for example. And for us, we focus really around trade, and our fund really is to provide, working capital for exporters who have a demand, who have a contract either in Canada or anywhere in the world, and require, capital to ensure that trade is met successfully and continuously. And that's really what our fund is about at Farmties. And we believe in this thesis because whenever you take a cup of coffee, you may be sure that that cup probably has coffee from Kenya or East Africa, which has contributed to global supply chain.
That's really great. Thank you for setting that up. And just to dig into some of those support mechanisms that you're mentioning, Farmties invests in African agribusinesses and provides support to these companies through combination of mentorship, technical assistance, and market linkage. So what have been your key learnings in how these capacity building supports bridge social inequities?
Yeah, what we've seen is that both the financial exclusion and structural inclusion are pretty much the same thing, just wearing different substitutes. And what we've noticed is that there has to be that sort of, maybe translation in building the capacities of SMEs in Africa to understand what is globally demanded and even vice versa. And so what we've seen is that information gap and knowledge gap, there's that opportunity to bridge that, especially around certification, especially around quality requirements, especially around meeting the international standards. And it's very interesting that every jurisdiction has the way they operate. So if you want to get your products into Canada and get your product into US, there are certain things that are expected of you just be thinking, oh, because I have a fantastic product, then it can get to the market. But somebody has to provide that knowledge gap. And so for us, we do have like a technical assistance, program that we run, which I like to term an advanced business development support program, where we work with the businesses, assess their operations from start to finish. And you probably see the trend around EUDR traceability, which is now important in key supply chains. So it's how do we, provide that capacity such that they are able to, meet the demand and also meet the requirements of their destination company. And it's a very hands-on work because you look at it from two aspects, from the business, readiness in terms of, their operational history, their governance structure, but also the trade opportunity and, understanding and meeting the market demand. And that's where we really see, us playing that role around capacity building, around, knowledge sharing, around, just demystifying, like just making things simple, demystifying, like, knowledge that maybe Canada has, and there's opportunity for support around getting CFI, licenses, for example, but then an African SME may not know, and then somebody else, does that role for them when they could actually be playing, in that market. And that's the gap that we've seen, and we've been able to, on the Canadian end, partner with, some experts who are able to, bridge that gap and even also in other regions globally. And we're seeing a lot of improvements from some of the SMEs that we work with.
Uh, yeah, I think it's super important that we're seeing a lot of cases with impact funds that's not just capital coming to the table, but also bringing that support for the capacity and capability. And it seems like Farmties has built that, into the structure from the start. So it's really great. And one of the things also built into that structure is a strong focus on who gets backed. And
Mhm.
Farmties investment thesis, it targets African entrepreneurs, agriculture, and gender and youth inclusion. So, what is the importance of backing these entrepreneurs, and what unique role do they play in food systems and global trade?
Though we follow trend, we know that Africa, has 60%, uncultivated land. But even beyond that, Africa produces most of the key commodities that Europe, North America, Asia depend on. And, most of the time we see this value captured outside the continent when there is opportunity for co-investment, co-manufacturing, even from the continent that can meet, international standards. And this is already happening because when you look at Africa and see maybe a few multinationals that are working in the country or even a few agribusinesses that are processing and packaging for, global markets right on the continent, you see that that opportunity, is there. But what is also interesting is the role, of gender and youth. Africa also has the youngest population, as we all know, and that means that we're a population where, the future of food, the future of trade is actually in Africa, with the population that we have. But not just that, it's also, I'll say, the connecting lines between, the agricultural value chains. A lot of times and many agricultural value chains, especially, in terms of gender, women play a key role. And unfortunately, they are always the ones that either are underfinanced, or do the most of the work. I remember one of my projects in Nigeria where it was, aggregating ginger. It was really a hands-on experience where women were actually sorting and picking the ginger live. And so when we take, a ginger tea, maybe somewhere, wherever in the world, and you trace it, you see the role women play in that ecosystem. And one thing that we've seen at Farmties is that for every trade you finance, you can be almost, guaranteed that it's going to get into, the hands of either a woman smallholder farmer or a woman entrepreneur or even, a worker who has worked in the value chain. And for us, based on all of these things that, Africa brings, the young population, the arable land, the, contribution to, global food supply chain with the key commodities that Africa produces, we do see that, as important in backing, these entrepreneurs, in Africa.
That's really nice to hear. And I think it tells a nice story of seeing where innovation in the food systems is actually happening. And I think the Canada connection really matters here too. And you're based in Canada, investing in African agribusinesses. That's its own vantage point. And as your fund supports entrepreneurs as they prepare for international trade, how does your dual perspective of being based in Canada impact how you approach this? And how is this process collaborative rather than perspective?
It's a very great question. Based in Africa, also based based in Africa, also based in Canada. One thing we really love about trade from Farmside's perspective is that it's two sides of the same coin. And so when you look at exports leaving Africa to Canada, you can observe just flip the coin and look at, Canadian companies importing from Africa. And so that translation also matters, and translation in terms of, quality requirements, that would sustain the Canadian, industry and food, systems, especially for commodities that cannot be grown in Canada, but also, de-risking that African, transaction or even the business itself to understand the requirements around governance, ESG frameworks that are required. One thing I also found fantastic with my experience, being in Canada is that Canada does have, a very, interesting impact investment ecosystem that should be scaled globally. And I feel there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from the Canadian ecosystem from, work around, social finance, but also even in, impact investing as a whole. And for me, I think that's a sentiment that I also share is that how can we, take the innovation around finance to scale into markets and create, sustainable business relationships between, Canada and a continent like Africa, with all the tools that are existing. So for us, it is a two-way thing, I would say, and we see the opportunity that for collaboration and for building together.
That's really amazing. Thank you so much, Dara. I think, what you've walked through here and what you built in FarmTides it's a very great articulation of what it looks like to put equity into agriculture investment, not just as that value statement, but really as a financial structure. So yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us today. So we're going to move on to our next issuer, and I'll hand it over to Haley to take over that. Right.
Thanks so much, Mazan. I'm here today with Brian Duarte, and Brian is leading BlackTech Capital, which is a venture capital firm investing in underrepresented founders that are leading the future of climate resilience and climate innovation. So, to start, thanks so much, Brian, for being here. Would you be able to introduce yourself, talk a bit about your story and your fund?
Sure. Thank you very much, Haley. Excited to be here, presenting here as part of the SVX platform. So my background is as a founder. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So being building businesses all my life, and actually even when I started off after university in the corporate world, built a business inside of that corporate arm where six of us created a business that was eventually sold off after leaving the corporate world. I built a number of companies myself, some very successful. I had two good exits and some that weren't. So seen all sides of that. And then back in about 2017, 2018, I started working with the Center for Social Innovation, their climate ventures group, and helping companies in the climate space accelerate. My background is in the energy space. I've been in that for over 30 years. I've been in sustainability for over 10 years. But I was seeing founders that look like myself, so Black founders from other underrepresented groups, and even women founders that we count inside of those underrepresented groups that are just not getting funding. They're seeing all the great opportunities, they're creating great businesses, but they weren't getting the funding that they need. And I wanted to be part of that solution. So fast forward to 2021, and we started building BlackTech Capital. It's myself. I have a co-general partner, Kiana. She's actually located in the US, but the fund is based here in Canada in Toronto, and another team of nine venture partners that support that. So we're investing in underrepresented founders at the not at the forefront, but bringing great innovation. Some of that is at the forefront in climate tech, clean tech space. So that's where the fund is focused on.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for
Mhm.
sharing that. And
Mhm.
especially since a lot of your investment thesis and the purpose of your fund is to emphasize the grit and the unique perspective that underrepresented founders bring to addressing climate change, and building that resilient future. How have your interactions and your perspective as a founder yourself, shifted your perspective?
I guess it comes from two different perspectives. One, for as being an underrepresented founder myself, some of the challenges you face when you're in it on your own, you're going, is it me? What am I facing? Or is it some of these more systemic issues? And then when I started working with other founders, I'm seeing that. But when I look at the climate and what we need everyone to be part of that solution. So when we're looking at women founders, when we're looking at South Asian founders, Black founders, Asian founders, everyone brings in a different perspective. Just hearing from Dara and talking about what's going on in the African continent, what their challenges they're facing in climate is different than what some of the challenges we face in North America. So having all that input brings that unique perspective. And we put in our tagline now, this isn't philanthropy. This is performance powered by purpose. So we're not doing this because it's just a nice to do and we want to see money goes to these founders. No, we're in this, we're a venture fund. We're in this to make money and we're in it to have a big impact. So we like bringing in those unique perspectives. And, you say myself, and Kiana, when we have these conversations with some of the founders that we're talking to, that we're looking to invest into, I don't know how many times we hear, wow, this is unique in terms of a refreshing conversation. They're able to open up more and share more. And there's a good and a bad for them sometimes inside of that because they're open up, they're trusting. We hear, oh, there's an issue with this one. This solution may not go somewhere for this and this, but we get a fair and honest perspective. We also hear, oh, wow, learning more, learning deeper about it, and saying this is a great opportunity. This founders really explored the market. They really understand, as back to understanding the unique challenges and perspectives and what they need to bring to make a difference there. So those conversations is where it all starts with. And then we look at what's the big problem they're solving, what's the major impact. And we're looking at companies that are making better use of our natural gas sector here in Canada, but they're doing it in a more efficient way and significantly reducing emissions. We're looking at investing in companies that are helping with the change to electrification. And we're looking at companies that, I mean, we have a reliance on oil. Oil is not going anywhere anytime soon in our world, in our economy. But you look at what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz being closed and the war in the Middle East and the impact that that's had worldwide. China has made leaps and strides. That's why China went to more um, renewable resources, right? It wasn't because it was the right thing to do. It made economic sense. And we're helping Canadian companies, North American companies do that. And we're looking at those companies that are moving away from some of our oil dependency. Yes, it's the right thing to do for climate impact. And it also makes great economic sense. And there's a huge opportunity there with that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And a lot of the examples you brought up, as you're saying, it's combining the purpose and the profit. So one part of that combination of the purpose and profit is the mentorship and capacity building and support that you provide to your founders through the Climate Exit Lab and the Founder Studio. So I'd love to hear a bit more about these programs and how did they come about, and how do you see these programs and how they address the challenges unique to founders?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Haley. We're looking at founders. We know it's not just about our investment. So with our Climate Exit Lab, we're a venture fund. We've got a 10-year life. We are looking at businesses that are going to exit. So when we talk to our founders, we're saying, have you thought about this? How have you thought about it? And we help them from day one engineer toward that exit. It's their best interest based on what they want to do, and it's in our best interest as a fund. So we are working with them. 3 to 4 companies we're about to invest in, we help them. Their rounds are complete. We've helped them get further investment. That's taking them farther, getting that towards the next step that they need to go. So the Exit Studio is focused around that. The Founder Studio, we've got founders coming out of academia, great set of knowledge. And I usually find in early stage companies, they're technical experts. They're great at what they do technically, but there's other stuff you need as a CEO in terms of managing people, managing customer relationships, managing investors. So there is so much more beyond that. And that's where our Founder Studio is designed around, helping provide those founders with what they need to be successful beyond just the technical side of things.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thank you for sharing that. Last kind of question I want to ask you was, what role have you seen ecosystem partnerships play in bridging social equity gaps, and what areas of improvement do you see in this sector in Canada, and how has BlackTech Capital been part of that? The changes, positive changes.
So different partners have helped with part of that. BlackTech Capital, we're part of the World Economic Forum through their Uplink platform. That gives us access to partnerships and opportunities for our portfolio companies on a worldwide stage. We're partnered with SVX, we're partnered with other different accelerators and groups that give us access to those that are care about the impact space, as well as those that can help our founders in the impact space. But the missing, when you ask that question, on the Canadian landscape, we still do not see enough investment into the early stage businesses, and it's seen as risky. And I tell people, I'm not a gambler. I go to Vegas, I spent $10, right? I'm looking at companies that have got, again, can perform, can do well. And I think it's up to us as Canadian investors to start looking at some of these early stage businesses and look into how can we get more money into the ecosystem earlier on and bring those companies further down the scale, not just looking when they're at Series A or, hey, go to the US, prove yourself down there, and then come back here. The money is there. I think it's just about educating ourselves as others investors about investing in those early stage companies and really helping to take them to the next level because we've got some great businesses being made. They are addressing some huge needs that are out there, but they also know they know who their customers are, they know their customer pain points. Those are the businesses we look at, and the basically the opportunity and the money they can make from that and make money for investors as well as part of it, in addition to having that a big impact for us on the climate.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like BlackTech Capital is a great example of being part of the partnerships, both at like the wider ecosystem level, but then directly with your founders and who you're investing in. So thanks so much for sharing your perspective. I'll pass it off
You're very
back
welcome.
to,
Thank you, Haley.
yeah, it's great to talk to you today. I'll pass it off to Mizan and he'll do the next interview with Alejandra.
So much, Haley, and thanks, Brian. Yes, our next guest is Alejandra Revuelta, Senior Portfolio Officer at Deetken Impact. Deetken manages the ILU Women's Empowerment Fund, the first gender lens investing fund dedicated to Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Alejandra.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I'll kick things off by asking if you could tell us a bit about your story and your fund.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm Alejandra Revueltas, and I'm a senior officer at Deetken Impact. So I think my story goes back, I think now 10 years in the impact investing world. So I originally started my career in finance. I was working at JP Morgan, and interestingly enough, I found out about the impact investing world while working at JP Morgan, since I mean they are one of the leaders in all the ESG and impact investing from a banking perspective. So it was very interesting how my I think interest sort of correlated in my early stages of my career. And then I decided to go all like full in impact investing. So yeah, I quit. I just went and do a master's degree in social entrepreneurship to focus entirely kind of the other side of the coin, and to know what was the the important things that the companies should have in order to generate both impact and financial returns as well. And then later on, I just started my career in impact investing, and since then I've been on the other side of the coin, being an investor and supporting this amazing companies, which I think I always have a huge respect for these companies because it's very difficult. I mean, being an entrepreneur is very difficult, and I think I would say if you add a layer of difficulty there or challenge, being an impact entrepreneur is I mean, I'll say it's a little bit more interesting. So yeah, I mean that's my story, and I've been with Deetken Impact for about 4 years now. So I'm originally from Mexico, but I'm based now in Vancouver, where Deetken Impact is based. So a little bit of the history of Deetken Impact is an obviously impact fund manager, and even though we're based in Canada, we invest in Latin. We are based in Canada. Sorry, we invest in Latin America. So from Mexico all the way down to Argentina. We've managed 5 funds and a total approximately of $150 in assets under management. And among these different funds, we have different investment strategies, depending on obviously the risk thesis of investment that each of the funds have, and also different impact strategies. So we have funds completely targeting climate action, so renewable energy projects based in the Central America and the Caribbean mainly. We also have two other funds focused on economic empowerment. So we've invested in different sectors, always generating positive social environmental impact. So education, affordable housing, healthcare. I mean, really any sector that is capable, to generate positive social environmental returns. And then, well, we have our anchor fund, ILU Women's Empowerment Fund, that, as its name says, is targeting women empowerment and gender equity in Latin America. So we launched this fund in 2016 with support of ProMujer. We developed some frameworks for advancing gender equity, and these frameworks include tools for assessing, monitoring, and also supporting the companies to sort of bridge the gap or to reduce the gap really in gender inequalities. We have invested in 14 countries throughout Latin America today and made 34 investments. And we're very proud to say that this year will be the 10th anniversary of the fund. So we're going to have 10 years track record of delivering consistent returns to our investors and also generating an important impact. So we're very proud of that.
Wow. First of all, congratulations on coming up on that 10-year anniversary. That's definitely a very big achievement. And thank you for sharing your story and a bit of the background of Deetken Impact. I do want to touch into a little bit about what makes Deetken's approach quite distinctive. And Deetken Impact uses their own custom-built gender lens investing approach. Can you share some of your learnings in designing this approach? And what are the high-level themes and dimensions that you think are key considerations for a social equity investment approach?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's a pretty good question. So I think it's important to mention that, gender lens investing is not only investing in women entrepreneurs. It goes way beyond that. And I mean, I think it's important to address the uniqueness of the companies and help them towards this journey of reducing gender gaps. So that's why we decided, again, as I mentioned before, with the support of Mujer, to building this framework, and it has 4 different lenses. So the first one is women in leadership. So when we look for companies or in like within our pipeline, we look for women in leadership, but that not only means women being CEOs. So we want to know if women are part of the C-level team, if women are owners of the companies, if they are founders, maybe they were founders, but they don't have an active role right now. We want to know whether if they have an active role right now as well. And also one other important factor is women in governance. So whether if there are women in the board of directors, and if there are, or how many women are in the kind of decision-making roles. The second important lens that we have is, products and services benefiting women and girls. So we look for companies that with their operations are directly benefiting women and girls. So when we invest in companies, we like to see the impact embedded within the business model and not something that is secondary or like a nice to have, or I'm gonna try to include a like gender product within my strategy when it doesn't really fit, right? So it's important for us that the actual products or services that are being offered by the companies are directly generating a positive impact in women and girls, and the majority of those times is including them in the kind of economic cycle and reducing obviously the gaps, right? Then the third one is women in the workplace. So as I mentioned, it's a little bit related to the women in leadership, but we like to see also a commitment and a true representation of women in the workplace. Different sectors obviously have different sort of level of women representation in their workforce. So we push to see that in our portfolio companies. And last but not least is women in the value chain. So it's sort of covering all the different phases or the different points of what a company or strategy of company can be. So the last one is a value chain. So we also encourage and want to see companies to have a little bit more of kind of due diligence or review integrated within their practices and policies as well. So it's not only about the company, but it's also about how can I sort of also share the importance of gender equity within the economic cycle. So that's why we encourage the companies to review whether if their suppliers have policies regarding gender equity, or also supporting businesses that are led by women. So I mean, these are the 4 most important components, or the 4 components of what we look for in companies to reduce gender gaps. And now recently we have integrated also the 2X criteria, which is a standard for gender finance globally. And we have integrated that into our gender lens framework. And this is to align with sort of common language and also to have a benchmark to set a standard. And actually, I think this is one of the most important learnings that we've had. That is very important for the industry as a whole to have a benchmark, because you're able to prove progress in a better way and prove results. As I mentioned, it sets a standard. So right, so in the end, this ensures that we are all walking as an industry. We're all walking in the same direction, and that we are able to create, measure, and demonstrate real change with this. And I would say that the other learning from this framework is that we've seen that gender equity needs to be embedded within like the whole investment cycle. So from screening to due diligence to monitoring the investments and also engagement with the company. And it's similar to our framework of gender lens. The companies, as I mentioned, these 4 different lenses. It's like gender is included within the whole strategy of the business, and it's the same for investments. It needs to be embedded within the whole investment cycle, because this when you have like standalone efforts, it's very difficult to drive real change. So if you have a sort of a complete and whole effort within the investment, then it's easier to the impact of on the gender component. You can see it in a more straightforward way and embedded within the actual investment opportunity. So yeah, that's why we and also I think it's important to sort of communicate with the companies from the very beginning that this is what we like to see. This is our investment thesis, and it's important also for the relationship with the company, because it sets standards of this is the impact or gender impact that we're looking for.
Thank you so much for walking through all of that. It's very interesting to hear, and I think it's really an important point you make about through the process is really evaluating it and doing that measurement from the start rather than only reporting on it after or looking at it as metrics after the investment. So I think it's a very unique and interesting proposition this fund is doing. Um, just for the sake of time, we'll move on to the next segment we have with our spotlight guest, Lars. But I want to thank you, Alejandra, so much for your answers and your insights. I think the ILU Fund is now a really great proof point of showing the gender equity financial returns is not a trade-off, and you've really built a model for other markets and other funds can learn from. So really appreciate you being here today. Okay. Thank you. So I'll hand it off to Adam to get started.
Excellent. Many thanks, Mizan, and thanks, Haley, as well as Alejandra, Brian, and Dara as well. So next segment, really delighted to be doing a bit of a deep dive into market updates. So this gives us an industry-wide view of what's happening in terms of trends and its intersection with equity. In order to do that, delighted to be joined from Lars from Realize. And again, big round of emoticon applause for Lars for joining us. And we'll share just in the links in the chat what we do in terms of the quarterly digests and updates. You can take a look at that. Now, Lars has a wide view on a weekly basis of what's happening in impact investing. So this is a real treat for us to have a chat with him. And I know it's hard to pick, but if you were to think of the last quarter generally, what would you see would be the most notable trends or stories in impact investing that you followed?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think the most notable pieces can sort of be categorized in my mind with a bit of sort of there's a top-down view and a bit of a bottom-up view. And I think on the top-down side, there are examples of initiatives that really are sort of trying to sort of change the structural conditions for the field in a way that makes everyone's success sort of more likely and can really reinforce positive equity outcomes. And so I think about, as an example, the significant policy win in making employee ownership trust incentives more permanent and legislated. That's a major one that's, again, very structural. I think about some of the early support that's now been publicly announced for the impact guarantee under the Social Finance Fund federally, to really begin to kickstart that work and sort of continue its progress to, again, make it sort of more likely that smaller scale community finance intermediaries can succeed, all as examples. And similarly, even in commanding sort of more global attention and trying to spotlight areas where Canada can take in significant global investment. Think about examples like Farm Credit Canada's capital coalition building as an example of, again, these sort of larger, more sort of structural top-down like initiatives that really stand out to me.
Excellent. I just want to note, any folks have questions for Lars as well as for the rest of the presenters, feel free to put that in the chat. But as we talk about that, those are the big and broad trends. A lot of capital, a lot of design and product development, which is really exciting. Maybe let's talk a bit more about notable trends or stories specifically in equity-focused impact or stories or activities in that particular field. And then how do you see the general trends intersecting or influencing equity-focused investments and strategies?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think there's some really great examples within that focus. And again, this sort of ties more into perhaps like the bottom-up kind of lens of work that really is around sort of coalition and movement building towards better equity outcomes. So I think as an example of the work of the Indigenous Venture Challenge, both in activating Indigenous investors themselves as asset owners and investors, as well as Indigenous entrepreneurs as recipients of that capital in sort of a different format of than just sort of a conventional sort of pitch program or pitch competition. Similarly, I think of like the continued extension of more crowd finance platforms to allow retail participants to direct their own assets in a more impactful way, and often in a way that is closer to social equity outcomes. So the work of groups like Front Funder, Go Parity, et cetera, all are sort of akin to that. And again, this sort of persistent trend. One other that I'd mention, I think it's sort of worth noting, would be the work of groups like Relevin and the Winnipeg Declaration to think about how faith lands, which are obviously dispersed all across the country, can be sort of repurposed to permanent social intent, and in their case, strong focus on community space and affordable housing. And so, where do some of those things tie in together as you call out? Like I think about the opportunities for things like now the existence of employee ownership incentives, not just to think about economic democracy in general, but also how can more equity deserving groups have access to wealth building opportunities through the process of employee ownership transition. How do we think about who, not just employee ownership itself, but who employee owners are, and to what degree can efforts be concentrated to drive greater benefit to equity deserving groups? And the good news is there's already examples of that, even in like the early precedents, like Taproot Community Services, the largest employee ownership transition under historically to date. Great example where its workforce are primarily women, many racialized women. That's a great example of the way some of these tools and big trends can translate down to strong social equity outcomes.
Excellent. That's great insights. And so we can see the big trends, those that intersect, and the work that, again, Brian and Dara and Alejandra are doing is remarkable. But it's also remarkably challenging, right? So there's challenges that folks face on a sector basis, driving systems changes as you do, or on a fund side or on entrepreneur side. Maybe could you talk about some of those challenges and then how folks may address those challenges?
Sure. I think from our perspective, we like to sort of try to boil things down to some sort of like first principles. And And in this case, like, ultimately being in the fund management business is itself a business, and it's really challenges that are analogous that many small businesses would themselves face, but where we see those being most amplified in the context of being a new and emerging manager or a new asset manager, is that it's such a economy of scale business. It's such a business that's sort of engendered by benefiting from scale and sort of success compounding success and momentum. As a result, for groups that don't come from significant wealth or have less access to it, the ability to like even build on early success can be much more challenging. And so, I think where we see folks finding opportunities to creatively address that really are opportunities that think to bring down sort of some of the fixed and transactive costs that serve as real sort of barriers to entry. Good examples of ways folks can do that are like formalizing strong partnerships, even with more established fund management platforms, bringing sort of their talent and unique thesis to a more incumbent platform where there might be deeper access to capital, but not the same differentiation in terms of strategy. We've seen that play out well with other new and emerging managers, but the opportunity to sort of apply that lens of social equity to that is relatively untapped. Similarly, we do think there are some real opportunities in sort of just sector building work to think about how sort of shared service type offerings can make that pathway just easier fundamentally and sort of lower cost and lower risk. I think the other thing that have some awareness of and realism of is like what is sort of a reasonable business plan for growth, and I think where we sort of recognize is that over the course of sort of an asset management business's lifetime, they will likely evolve to be more accessible and addressable to different investor audiences in particular. And so not necessarily trying from day one to style yourselves as sort of an institutional fund can be appropriate, and really thinking about, are there opportunities to not just sort of tell folks, but show folks by activating more high net worth capital, family office capital, foundation capital early in a way that can then compound into a more institutionally appealing product over time.
Excellent. Super insightful and super helpful. We'll maybe come back to some of those themes in the audience conversation, but maybe want to close on the future, right? So you track things on a weekly basis. Folks read and understand what's happening through the stories that you share. Could you give us a crystal ball? And with all cautions and disclaimers, but what do you think will be the next, interesting stories and trends to follow in the next 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, happy to try. I would say it's probably not a particularly clear crystal ball, but I think the pieces that I certainly continue to sort of be fascinated by as sort of these like big trends and what will that translate to are sort of big questions. And so for me, one is whether the discourse around economic sovereignty will translate to private capital mobilization domestically in a way that can drive greater access for all sort of new and emerging managers in the Canadian landscape. And so in particular, like we know that we're like coming up to CUSMA. We know that it probably will be a heated renegotiation. Like it'll just be so active in the sort of public domain that the same sense of sort of economic threat that we've seen in Canada over the last few years will sort of reemerge. Like it'll feel very visceral again. And I think because of that, there's this, I think, ongoing question is whether or not that sort of discourse will translate to where are pensions investing, where are insurance companies investing, where are other wealth holders and asset managers investing, and I think that remains an open question though. Like I think that like hasn't really, I think transparently, I think it's translated into a lot of sort of like PR effort. I don't know if it's translated into a lot of change yet. And so I think that's an open question to me. Similarly, I think there is maybe not 3 to 6 months, but maybe perhaps even extending that horizon, thinking about how already sort of mission-based organizations can continue to activate their capital becomes really fascinating. So, a good example recently this past year or these past couple quarters was the participation of groups like the Terry Fox Foundation and Canadian Cancer Society and Lumira's Cancer Breakthrough Fund. Like, we haven't had brand name health charities participate in significant ways in the impact investing space in Canada pretty much before. And so that's quite exciting. But similarly, extending that even into the realm of sort of social equity lens investing, like the opportunity for groups like Indigenous trusts as sovereign wealth holders to actually themselves become localized or impact focused investors in other Indigenous enterprise becomes really exciting. And again, it's an area that exists in Monaco, but it's sort of scratching the surface of the potential of that sort of reciprocal type thinking and investment.
Wonderful. Yeah, loads of opportunities and stories to track in the future. The first one, I think the opportunity for pension funds in Canada and crown corporations to kind of entrench their investments, their strategies towards local investments, including impact investments. CDPQ, one great example, Fond Action, another that has kind of a local and impact mandate. But let's stop there and maybe broaden the conversation. We'll pass to Mizan to be able to bring us through a full group chat and just say thanks, Lars, for joining us for that segment. But we'll open it up to the rest of the group, and I've got a few questions already from the audience.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you, Adam. So yeah, we've just heard from the three funds working at very different intersections of social equity. We have African agribusiness, climate tech for underrepresented founders, and gender lens investing in Latin America. And alongside it, Lars' view on where the market is heading. So yeah, I'll invite the four of you back in to open things up. And we do have a couple questions in the chat already. So we'll start off with the first one, which is from Patricia, and it's for Alejandra. Could you share an example of a before and after change in gender empowerment observed in one of your investees at Deetken Impact? What changes became visible in the short term, and which ones in the longer term?
Sure. Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, we have a lot, but I think I would want to focus one recent example. So we invested in a cacao traded company in Latin America based in Ecuador. And I mean, we know obviously that the agriculture sector is mainly driven by men. So I mean, women representation is not very. I mean, I was going to say not very common, but it's not a high representation of women in the agricultural sector. So they have both. I'm sorry, they have both a climate and a gender perspective as well. So originally, they didn't have a lot of women representation included within their value chain. So this company normally works with small farm holders in rural communities and help them throughout sustainability projects to have more sustainable practices and also to be able to have certifications from Rainforest Alliance. So what we noticed by working with this company is that women were actually part of that value chain, and they were part of the small holders sort of work in producing this cacao, but they weren't really represented throughout the value chain. Why? Because normally men are in front of their face front, and women were kind of in the back end, doing a lot of work, a lot of invoicing, a lot of finance, accounting, etc., but weren't really represented. So what we noticed that, and then we provided through technical assistance training for the employees from this company for them to in turn train as well the small farm holders in management, finance, commercial strategies, in order for them to be sort of, more prepared and more empowered and include them within the economic cycle and value chain. So this was, very, very interesting to see that now 100% of the women that we train are registered officially as part of the small companies of the small farm holders, and are included now in the economic cycle and the value chain. And also, this company is including this strategy as part of their whole company strategy, and they will be able to replicate this training for other small farm holders. So this was very interesting because we saw sort of a ripple impact in terms of gender and inclusion, not only at the company level, but the beneficiaries level as well. So yeah, I mean, this is one example. And I mean, I think in the short term, we can quantify, right, the numbers, the women's benefited, how many women's were trained, how many women's are now officially registered as part of the companies. But in the mid and long term, what we can see is the economic resilience, and also how women are tend to be more affected by climate change. So in the long term, also we can see how they become more resilient to climate change, because or to challenges faced due to climate change, because they are now more economically resilient.
Yeah, thank you so much for that example and explanation. We have another question in the chat from Moa for all the issuers. The question is, how do you reflect on the idea that the expectation of financial returns in impact investing might limit its ability to address the most urgent social challenges, especially those that aren't very profitable, and what opportunities might exist here? So I'll open it up to anyone who wants to respond. Brian, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, and building off of something that Lars just shared, I mean, when we look at the impact side of things, people think we're just focused on social challenges or just making a difference. And there's room for everything. And this is an example of where foundations can play a key role. And foundations are starting to look at that. The foundations and things like that are say, whether public money, government money, can address those social challenges that don't have the financial returns. But if they're also investing in funds like ours, they can get those financial returns to continue to do good work. So I think there's a blend of things that you can use those financial returns to address social needs that aren't profitable. So it's not just one answer for everything.
Absolutely.
I think I can just like also reiterate. I think the idea for impact investing is to do good, and also generate returns. And at the end of the day, you want to more like invest in sustainable enterprises, especially in developing, economies. And so it's almost, for foundations who are also well placed to redefine what return looks like, in terms of maybe impacts. And there are other forms of, return expectations, like maybe an outcome-based, return, or first loss position that they've like foundations can take even in a blended finance structure. But for me, I'm a strong believer in not subsidizing the market, but ensuring that business are able to run the sustainable enterprises, even that can outlive any donor or foundational support.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those answers, Brian and Dara. And thank you all for joining us again today. We are just hitting the time mark, so I'll pass it over to Adam to kind of close us off. But thank you once again.
Excellent. Many thanks, Mizan. Many thanks as well, Haley, Brian, Dara, and Alejandra for joining us, and to all of you for a really wonderful discussion and questions. Just a few highlights on latest and upcoming news from SVX. One, you'll have seen the market report, hopefully, that we released. We'll put a link in the chat related to that. You can always, if you're looking for more information about impact investing, also check out and visit our Knowledge Center. It has loads of great resources, upcoming events, news, and other activities. We also have a call for products for those that are issuing impact investing funds, bonds, and beyond. The deadline for that impact index collections as well as impact index plus is mid-September, September 14th. So again, thanks so much for all of us that joined today. Also, don't want to forget Gabby, our producer, for putting all of this together. And hope you'll join us for the next session. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great week. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Mizan. Thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.